We're looking now at principles of level 5 leadership, right? That's the first principle that they were looking at. And I just want to ask you to reframe, because you think that was what resonated most with you. What does it mean to be a level 5 leader?
The level 5 leader, they examined it through a whole chapter, which deserves that much discussion. Identifies the characteristics of leadership that brought each one of those companies beyond that baseline to their great period. And the one that stuck out with me the most is, we have this archetype in our head of what a leader should look like, and they're very directive and can almost appear to be overbearing. But the humbleness of the leaders that they discuss was something that really stuck out to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's a sort of level of selflessness involved, where if it is, it said something about when the leader looks to find accountability, he looks inward, he looks to himself, and then when he looks to ascribe success, he looks to either his team, or if he can't find it there, he'll just say, I got lucky, with the understanding that the sort of ego is removed. It's not this egoic leadership, it's more rooted in wanting the team to succeed.
Now, you are doing leadership training in some way, and I'm just curious in what way this resonates with the leaders that you're training. As you were mentioning, there is this stereotype out there of a leader, and we have it on Forbes magazine, we have it on all the sort of literature, in a way, the hero, the celebrity hero, like the CEO, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, those founders, those enigmatic figures that people revere in many ways. In what way does this sort of strike a chord with the people that you're working with, especially that humility is a principle for excellence?
Well, one thing that it strikes a chord with is leadership can be taught. It should be taught, and people may have a greater aptitude for leadership, but there are skills involved in it. So the skills that Collins discusses in this chapter are particularly relevant, because we see in our practice that a lot of people have never developed those skills. Even though they have an aptitude for it, it takes time to learn those knowledge, skills, and abilities associated with it. That's probably where it strikes the most accord for me.
Okay. But what about the humility piece? Because I think that is sort of counter to most of business culture, right? Most of even popular culture is like with the social media, everybody is celebrating themselves and not necessarily being humble at all, but the opposite. And in what way does that resonate?
One thing that resonates for me is leaders recognizing the rest of the team and getting the right people, as Colin says, getting the right people on the bus and recognizing.
Which is the next chapter.
But recognizing that it's not about the individual; it's about the larger team, and that's what one of the principles of leadership that.
The servant aspect.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think the humble leader in the context of the Elon Musk, as you mentioned, and these sort of other types of leaders. What I think about is the idea that Collins is writing for a specific type of company, a type of company that's trying to go from, the leader of a company that's trying to go from good to great. So we might not be talking about a Tesla. We might be.
Well, it's going from nothing to being quite visible.
Yeah,
right?
but the point I'm trying to make is that we see who Elon Musk is now, and we look at that as this sort of this revered figure. But what's being forwarded is this idea that, I don't know if Elon has always been that way, right? What's being forwarded is this idea that for this specific population, if you already have a great company and it's forward moving, fine, lead how you lead. But for this population, if we want to make that shift, we need to have that sort of humble leadership in order to get there.
Now, what's the second piece of this? There's humility to it, and what's the other piece? Because I think it's important to keep this in mind.
Yeah, the other piece was sort of this, business-driven fortitude, this idea that we're going to hit our deadlines and we're gonna make sure that we have faith that we will get there.
Right, it's a separate principle, but in some way I want to sort of point the equation and make just very clear what is the winning combination in terms of Collins' level 5 concept. Do you recall?
I don't recall off the top of my head.
So it's humility and professional will. Okay, it's coupled with professional will. Now, what oftentimes happens in conversations is like, oh, okay, you've got to be meek, and you're not going to show up, you're not going to enter the room in any way so that people notice you, etc., etc. That may or may not be so. We're going to explore this a little bit more. On the other hand, what I think is important to point out, the professional will piece needs to be coupled with it, right? People in those level 5 leadership positions or that exhibit level 5 leadership are incredibly ambitious, are incredibly willed to achieve a certain goal. So if you're looking back at the kind of people that you know in leadership or the people that you have worked with possibly, it's like, how much does professional will play a role? And what is professional will in your understanding?
Professional will plays a huge part of it in my experience. I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of former military officers, retired general officers, flag officers, and that's a common characteristic that you see amongst them is will to get things done and be the first to show up, lead from the front, and that's where I've seen it the most, Professor.
And what do you think gets people to do that? What is the sort of why for them to be so professionally willed? So
I mean, I think that's coming from someone who's trained in psychology, a background who's trained in psychology. Also, I think that there's a need. There's an internal drive, a need to, either I need this personally, or I need this for my family, or I need this for the society, but or I just really want to do this. But there's a hunger and a thirst. And as someone who's, I've also worked with a lot of startups, just as a consultant. And one of the things that I've noticed is that when the startup gets going, there's this ambition, like we have to do this, we're gonna do this. But when we scale, and then we start sort of making consistent revenue, the margins are good, I noticed some of the professional will drop a little bit.
Complacency.
And so I think in this context, in context of Collins' piece, is that we always have to a good leader, a level 5 leader will always maintain that. Even when we start to make that growth, it's like, okay, well, where can we go next? And how, there's always this desire to achieve.
Okay. Because I think this is very critical to understand. And I would sort of submit that the motivation that leads to professional will is very critical. And I want to point out these differences between what we call extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation, right? And you may be describing that in some ways like, okay, there are some people that are very ambitious in a sense that they try to achieve a certain reward. Being captain possibly, being promoted, being the top rank in an organization, making money, right? Those are all extrinsic rewards. And they're extremely powerful. I think that what Collins is saying, and I want to discuss this with you, whether you agree or not, is that yes, this can get you so far, but not necessarily to level 5 leadership, right? Because in a way, these people that are leading these transitions towards greatness in the organizational context are driven by more. They're driven by an intrinsic motivation. They have a higher level reason of why they're doing what they're doing. We can call this professional will. They want to do the best they can in that job where they're at for the motivation that they attach to it that is intrinsic, that's within them. They want to show something. They want to be of service. They want to do something that's serving a higher purpose, right? But that's just an interpretation in a way. I want to get your sense of that. Does that make any sense?
So in my experience owning my own business, it makes perfect sense. You find that money only motivates people so far. Some of the things that motivate people the most is public appreciation for everything that they're doing. And I think that ties directly back to intrinsic will versus intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. And money only takes people so far. There has to be a higher purpose to it.
So is the higher purpose then public appreciation, or is there something different from the public appreciation? Because sometimes people don't even know these people, right?
Sure.
in this context of these organizations.
Sure.
Who would have known about these CEOs? Nobody knows them, right? So
Right.
there is no public appreciation there. So how would you?
So some of the other significant motivators are the type of mission or type of work that they do. Is a huge part, and we'll talk more about that in the hedgehog concept.
Exactly.
That's another piece that you see a lot of that really motivates people, is that higher mission outside of.
Right.
I think people are also, in general, driven to see themselves as good, and driven to see themselves as effective, and driven to see themselves as successful. And we give ourselves certain cultural life scripts, certain moments where we can prove that to ourselves. Like, see, I knew I was effective. And we may not say that consciously, but unconsciously, there's this sense that we are purposeful in this life, and that we're effective, and that we have something to offer the world. And I think when the motivation of the leader is more connected to wanting to see oneself as an effective leader or as an effective person, it shifts the how I lead then, because now I'm working for you. I'm working to make sure that I'm good enough for you, as opposed to the more extrinsic motivation. I see it being, I already think I've arrived. I think I am the best and the person for this job, and therefore, what will motivate me to keep going or whatever is these external factors. I'm going to prove that I'm the best for this job because I'm going to watch our revenue increase or whatever the motivation is.
Well, let's connect this back to humility. Why would a humble leader be outperforming anybody else? And I just want to tie it back, because you were mentioning everybody wants to be good or something. But these are principles that he finds that are not there for everybody, right? We're going to get back to this in a moment, but I just want to point out these are very few people that are able to do this, right? So they're quite exceptional. So what is it that we can learn that is exceptional here, right? Because humility, we might think everybody has it, or intrinsic motivation, or everybody wants to be good, but there's something special about these guys. So I just want to probe this a little bit more and explore, why would humility be a factor for excellence? How would humility enable an organization to outperform?
I think because it changes the focus of the leader. I think that humility makes it less about me only. It makes it more about we. Makes it more about how are we doing, and how can I contribute to how we are doing, as opposed to how well are you doing for my bottom line, which is a different sort of focus.
Okay.
I think leaders set the tone for the organization. So any hierarchical organization, your leadership sets the tone for everybody else. So I think that that uniqueness of being humble at that level sets a culture throughout the rest of the organization.
But why would humility matter for excellence? Because it's not accepted typically in public culture, right? You would, as a humble organization, like these CEOs would never make it big on Forbes or Fortune or Business Week, right? They weren't, and they wouldn't want to. Why would that principle that doesn't get you out there, be so effective in terms of making the organization excel?
I mean, I think you can look at humbleness as a personality disposition only, or in addition to that, look at the behaviors that are associated with that disposition.
So what behaviors would that be that they inspire?
Yeah, so maybe, one, they inspire a more effective team of people around them.
Why would that be?
I think part of it is because, if I'm someone who feels like I don't have all the answers because I am humble, I would go in search of answers and I would do research and I would, want to know more about my challenge so that I can help solve the problem. If I'm a person who is not humble and and I feel like I have all the answers, I might not do that and I might use the wrong metric to drive progress.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I want to underline this. This may be a key. This that humility allows people, and we talked about this, to adopt this inquiry mode, to look for solutions and accept that we don't know things, especially in a changing business world, right? We don't know things. And the top level, if it sort of accepts that and sets the tone in a way, it's like, we know that we don't know. That's why we need help. That's why we need you to work with us, right? That's why we need to understand the problems best and then come up with solutions together. So it creates a different dynamic in a way. So people aren't necessarily waiting for somebody to tell them what to do, but it allows them to be empowered and engaged in searching for the best solution to an existing problem, right? So I think that's very critical to understand, that humility at that level is empowering so many people, specifically when it's combined with this professional will to actually come up with the best solution, right? What else would happen with a humble leader?
I think aside from the culture of inquiry, a culture of accepting risk-taking, feeling comfortable in risk-taking and knowing that you're not going to, it's acceptable to take a risk, and we promote that as an organization. And to your point, like it's about having a not level 5 leader at the top of the organization. People are I think hesitant to get self-started and to get out there and take a risk on things out of fear.
Great. So that's where we're going to go now. And we're sort of having these principles, professional will and humility, as a level 5 leadership principle. But as you see, the book is built up in a way that it starts with the leader, as you were mentioning in many organizations, that they set the culture. And I think it's important to understand that they actually didn't want to look at leaders at all. And then they found that that did make a difference, but not in the way that people would suggest it did. And so humility and professional will, these principles we're going to be referencing throughout. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Perry. This conversation was basically something that I think is core to understanding organizational excellence. We glorify leaders. The current culture, especially in the United States, but also across the globe, is glorifying individuals, is glorifying the charismatic leader. We even elect them that way. And there is something very, very important in this chapter, which says that the best leaders for the organization, from the organizational perspective to achieve organizational excellence, are not these type of leaders. They're actually humble and they're professionally willed to do the best that they can.